Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first in a four-part series where we're going to look at your preparedness journey. This is an opportunity for us to walk through the steps on how we develop our preparedness facilities to make sure that we are ready for whatever the future holds for us. I just want to check, can everybody see my screen? Can everybody hear me? Just a simple thumbs up from a couple of people would be very good. Thank you very much, James. Thank you, Mark. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so let's make a start. So what are we going to talk about today? Today is really an overview over what we're going to cover over the next 3 webinars, or 4 webinars if you include today. So we're going to really go back to basics today and look at oil spills as an incident that could impact us during our normal operations. We're going to look at what causes them. We're going to look at the impacts they have, especially when we're talking about the environmental and socio-economic impacts. We're going to look at some common response mechanisms. We're going to look at the framework that really helps us understand what is it that we have to do to be fully prepared and really prove to others, both within our organisation and also regulatory authorities and other key stakeholders, that we are prepared to respond. We're also going to just touch on some of the latest technological advantage that help us combat these, like it says on the screen, potentially devastating events. So we've got 5 points that we're looking at. Traditionally, oil spills have happened in a certain way, but what we're seeing now is the causes of oil spills are changing slightly. There's more things that we have to be aware of. We're also going to look at how we examine the environmental and socio-economic impacts. So what could an oil spill mean to us, not just in our ability to carry out our everyday operations, but also our reputation as a response organisation or as an organisation that deals with oils and other hazardous materials. As I said, we're going to look at the regulatory framework, the international regulatory framework, and how we can use that as a guide to show key stakeholders, others within our organisation, that we are prepared to respond. And also what we're doing to prevent oil spills happening in the first place. I'm going to quickly discuss what being prepared to respond means to us. Within Oil Spill Response, we travel the globe, meeting members involved in many, many different operations in the oil and gas industry. We're going to look at some of the best practices that we see as we do our engagement. And last but not least, we're going to take a brief look at the future of oil spill preparedness. We live in a wonderful age of technological advantage and things that are happening that make it easier for us to respond, easier for us to make sure that we get the best out of the resources that we have that are available to us. So if everybody's ready, we're going to begin. So, why do oil spills occur? So there are many, many reasons why oil spills occur, but there are 4 main or common factors that contribute to why the oil spills occur in the first place. Biggest of these are human factors. As you can see there, it's approximately 40% of all oil spills, of all incidents really, are caused by human factors. When we're talking about human factors, We're talking about mistakes that are made, errors, failure to follow our procedures, failure to really do or notice what it is that we are doing that's going on, things that are happening around us, that situational awareness. I've been a part of Wpit Response now for, oh crikey, almost 17 years. It'll be 17 years in January. And when I was part of the response team, it used to be a joke that we never had a Christmas at home. We were always responding to an incident during the Christmas or New Year period. And there was a reason for that. And the reason for that is, if you think about it, over a major holiday period, many operations are running on a skeleton staff, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. It's cold and wet and a bit dreary outside. And if you're sat inside and you're supposed to do your walkarounds or your checks, it can be very easy to put it off until the next morning, put it off until more people come in. So things go past unnoticed. And those things that go unnoticed, by the time you do notice them, it's too late to do something about it. So for the first 7 years, my first 7 years at Wpit Response, I was always out on an incident or involved in an incident over the Christmas or New Year period. The only reason that changed is the fact that I moved out of response and into the preparedness side. So human factors are still a key element on why oil spills happen. And what I want to avoid here as we go through this webinar today is picking on the big events, the Gulf of Mexico, the Exxon Valdez, because everybody thinks, oh, that's ancient history. This doesn't happen anymore. Well, in July this year, at the Esmeraldas Marine Terminal in Equinor, there was a 1,200 barrel spill of crude oil that lost after a storage tank overflowed. And in the preliminary report about why that happened, the human factor came into it. They weren't following their own procedures. They weren't monitoring the gauges. They weren't dipping the tanks. They were just reliant on, we've always done it this way. Nothing's happened before. We'll be fine. And of course, they weren't. The next biggest factor that contributes to oil spills is equipment failure or malfunction. And again, approximately 30%. You can look through all the reports, you can look at all the data that's coming out of why oil spills occur, and you'll get between 20 and 40% for equipment failure or malfunction. Again, this is something that occurs through no fault of one particular person, but something in the process has gone wrong. Just recently, in December 2022, the Keystone Pipeline here in the US lost between 12 and 14,000 barrels of crude oil. And that was caused by a weld flaw that led to a crack that grew over time. As a result of bending stress fatigue, caused this incident, this oil spill incident. And next, we've got natural disasters, around 8%. And it doesn't take a genius to see that globally, we are suffering more natural disasters than we typically would in the past. I mean, just recently, even this week, we've seen in Morocco the largest earthquake, I believe, that they've ever experienced in Morocco, with a devastating impact to the people that live there. So we're seeing more and more incidents caused by these natural disasters. And the example that I've used here is January 2022, the Alo oil spill in Peru. 6,000 barrels of crude oil was lost. And again, this was caused abnormal waves caused by volcanic eruption in Tonga. And if anybody's got a globe handy, look at where Peru is, look where Tonga is. You would never think, oh, I've got to be cognizant of what happens over here as it could affect me. But we know, we can understand that if there is this natural disaster, that it will have an impact on us. And then last but, sorry, by no means least, one of the 4 big areas is these intentional acts. Can't read this morning. Intentional acts for criminal or political motives. And again, this is approximately 8%. We see this happening all over the globe, whether it's a criminal activity where people tap into pipelines and try and steal products, where they cause tankers to crash, especially road tankers in certain countries, that they then attempt to steal the product, or even political motives, so war and civil unrest that happen in many parts of the globe. And in March 2022, Houthi rebels attacked an oil storage facility in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. So we're seeing more of these attacks, things that are happening, things that we have to be aware of. In areas that are typically quite stable, but we do have to be aware that things can change very quickly. But I don't want you to think, oh, Tristan, this is in these areas. These are in these war-torn areas. There's always civil unrest and strife. But if we look at what's happening here in the US at the moment, the US Coast Guard issued a notice to mariners about the increase in piracy in the Gulf of Mexico, where groups of criminals, armed criminals, are boarding vessels involved in the oil and gas industry. And they're looking at theft from the crew. They're looking at taking things. And it's just a small step from that to a vessel being taken. Piracy happens in many parts of the world, and it's a growing, unfortunately, it's a growing industry. But obviously these 4 elements aren't the main things that happen. There's an other there at the bottom, which is a wonderful catch-all for us consultants. And this covers the things like natural seeps, indirect operational accidents, mystery spills, things that we are aware of that also contribute to an oil spill occurring. So now we've looked at some of the causes of oil spills. We're going to look at their impacts. Now, impacts that you feel or that can be experienced from an oil spill are very, very location specific. But there's 3 main things that happen when oil is spilled. The first is this acute toxicity, basically poisoning. So it's the ability of an oil to cause this severe biological harm by death or poisoning by exposure. This is especially prevalent in some of the refined products that we see, especially if this product can evaporate quickly and be released into the atmosphere. So we talked about acute toxicity. This is the poisoning of the oil on the plants, on the animals, when it's released into the environment. Next is smothering, so the coating of plants, animals by oil that is at such a level it causes physical injury. So it affects their ability to continue the critical functions that they need to survive, whether that's breathing, feeding, monitoring or managing their temperature, or even absorbing sunlight. So the plants that need to absorb sunlight to survive. The smothering of oil. So again, this happens with certain types of oil more than others, where you get that thick coating of oil, and especially if it's emulsified, if it's soaked in water and turned into that mousse that we have to respond to. And then last but not least is persistence. So how long is this oil going to impact the environment, going to stay in this location? And how long will it take to naturally break down and be absorbed back into the environment? And it allows us, looking at the makeup of our oil, allows us to see what the chronic or the long-term impact of the incident could be. As you can see, it says at the bottom that the different oil, the different makeup of oil. So for example, some oils have components called polyocylic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, which can cause these long-term sublethal chronic effects. So it's not just this big shock that happens right at the start. It's slowly over time. It impacts the plants and the animals, hence their ability to breed, to grow and survive. Okay, now we're going to look at some of the socio-economic impacts. Now, everybody, when we talk about this, but typically when we talk about this, people think, oh, it's going to be the impact to our ability to carry out our everyday operations. It's going to be the impact for our neighbours' operations, or the fishing industry, the tourist industry. And while that is very important, there's other impacts that occur as a result of an oil spill. The first is the impact on the individuals, on people themselves. Obviously, there's the physical health effects from exposure to spilt oil, dermatitis, headaches, breathing problems. Different things that we manage very carefully in our response personnel, but we have to be aware of in other people who could be impacted by an oil spill incident. But now also there's a growing awareness of the psychological health effects that impact people as a result of an oil spill. Things like stress, depression, anxiety, even something as difficult to measure as this decrease in healthy behaviours, where people fail to look after themselves because they've just got so much going on, how their normal day-to-day operations, their normal habits have been impacted to such a degree that it changes how they look at the world and how they look after themselves. This is one of the great things about being a response operation, is you have to understand that when you do anything, that things can change. You know, I'm old, I'm 52 years old now. We used to call it Murphy's Law, that if something bad could happen, then it's going to happen. So again, even with something as simple as giving a webinar, it could be that your laptop decides to play up. It could be that your internet is playing up. I'm just waiting for one of the dogs to kick off here as well, and then we'll have the trifecta of bad things that can happen. Anyway, moving on. Socioeconomic impacts. There's more and more data coming out about the impacts on individuals, on their psychological health, their well-being. And we're looking at not just the impact on responders and the management team and in the organisation where they've had this incident, but also in other key stakeholders in the general population, how it can really negatively impact their mental health. And then we have the shared impacts on individuals and communities. And these are the economic impacts. So for individuals, you can have loss of income, property damage, increased costs, depletion of savings, because if you're not getting money coming in from working or doing your activities, then you have to rely on something to get you through those hard times. And then the communities themselves. If it's a fishing community, if it's a tourism community, if it's something that's linked or impacted by this oil spill, it's going to disrupt the industry. Also, if you think about what happens, if there's an oil spill in a certain part of the world that's known as a tourist destination, known as a fishing destination, for example, people are going to be put off wanting to come to that region. So the brand of that region as a tourist destination, for example, gets negatively impacted. And of course, on the bigger scale, if people aren't coming and spending money, then the tax revenue charged by the state or the government also decreases. So that has a knock-on effect to so many other things that are not directly impacted by the oil spill. And then we have the impact on the communities themselves. Decreased trust in authorities is a big one for us, big one that we face, where people, after an incident occurs, start to question everything that we're doing. Are you doing everything to minimize the impact on their day-to-day lives? This is where good communication is absolute key when we're letting people know this is what we're doing. This is how we're managing the incident. Obviously, there's going to be things like population displacement. It's not just people leaving the area, but if you think about responders and people coming in to an area specifically to deal with that incident. So you're getting changes in the makeup. Might be short-term changes, but there's still changes in the makeup, the people that are there. And then you've got this cultural impact, the loss of sense of place and security. I'm very fortunate here. I live way out in the country, so nobody's going to come out and bother us. But when I lived in Houston, we had somebody trying to break and enter the house at 5:30 on a Monday afternoon. Now, I have dogs, I have security, I have all different things. But the mere fact that somebody tried to do that to the house really impacted how I felt about that house. Now let's expand that and think about the mere fact that you live in this area and something bad happened to it. You're going to start looking around and see a lot more things as a threat that you thought would never happen. So you get that sense of unease. And combined with that is this decreased use of traditional resources. So if your family have always been fishermen and that's your identity, you've gone out and you've fished, or you've run a certain business, a family-owned business, and that's been taken away from you, that's going to have a huge impact. So as we can see, there's so much more that could be impacted by an oil spill than the traditional. It's going to stop this company operating. It's going to stop the local fishermen. It's going to put off tourism. The knock-on effects can be huge from a single oil spill. So there's lots of things happening here. There's lots of ways that oil spills could occur. There's lots of impacts that they could have. But there is a process that we use to assess that. has my slide changed for everybody now? Hopefully we're on slide 6. Yeah, perfect. Okay, good. All right, so there is a process that we follow to assess these risks. We're going to talk about this more during the next webinar, but briefly on this slide, we're going to ask ourselves 5 questions. Those questions is, what can happen as we walk around our operation, as we look around what it is that we do? What could go wrong? What really helps here, sometimes you can be too close to an operation to really take that step back and have a big picture. And it's really useful to get somebody from outside the organization in. Give that 10,000 feet view of our operations to look at the big picture and assess, okay, we understand the operational things that can go wrong, but on a larger scale, what else could happen? The next one is absolutely obvious. Know your oil, know the products that you're dealing with. Many types of oil have SDS sheets. They tend to get put in a folder, shoved on the side of our operations and forgotten about. Pick them up, read through them, have a look. There's a lot of really good information in these SDS sheets that tell you what is likely to happen to the oil if it's spilled, health hazards that we need to be aware of. So don't ignore your SDS sheets. The next is, where can it go? What could be impacted if we have an incident? And again, it's always useful to get somebody from outside to come in and look at our operations and understand that, yes, this area might be bunded, but what if a drain gets left open? What if we have heavy rainfall? What if something else happens that makes that containment not as effective as it should be? So once we understand where the oil could go, what's in its way? What could it impact? The resources at risk. And once we know that, we can look at the potential consequences. We understand, hey, these things could be impacted. What are going to be the knock-on effects of that? This could be anything from a mangrove area, wildlife area, an industry, a town. So we go through a step-by-step process to understand what our risks are, what the likelihoods are of an oil spill occurring, and what the consequences could be if this oil spill were to happen. And I don't want people just to sit there today and go, oh, like it's just Tristan talking through another slide deck. I want you to take this information and see how it applies to your operations. Look at your current risk assessments. Talk to members of your operational and facility team. Get their feedback on where they think a potential problem could occur. One of the things that we've seen recently, especially after the COVID pandemic that impacted everybody, is we've seen a lot of changes in staffing in the oil and gas industry. People with many years of experience that we've relied on heavily to get us through incidents that have occurred, that have happened, have now left the industry. And we've got newer people in, very highly trained, very intelligent people, but just lacking that experience of rolling with the punches when they come and coming up with solutions. So what we need to do is get back to this knowledge sharing, talking to people within our organization, getting their experiences, seeing what they've seen, and understanding how they've dealt with it and how we can use that experience to make ourselves more aware of the risks that we face. Okay. The International Regulatory Framework on Oil Pollution. So, again, it's basically split into 3 different parts. The first part is prevention. So what international conventions are in place to stop oil spills happening in the first place? So the big one, MARPOL, as it says on the screen, an International Maritime Convention establishing measures for dealing with marine pollution incidents nationally, cooperative, in cooperation with other countries. So what does that mean? Basically, it allows different regions to share their experiences, share what's happened to them. Because we learn when we learn from others. If we see, hey, in this region, this is what happened. Could this happen to us? We're trying to be this global community and learn from others. Not just the bad things that have happened, but also the good things as well. Why are certain areas less impacted by oil spills than others? Is it simply a case of location? Or are they doing something? The idea of which we can take and implement into our area. There's also this International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS. So this is a maritime treaty, and it sets out minimum safety standards in the construction, equipment and operation of merchant ships. So the big one that we have here is the double-hulled tankers as opposed to the single-hulled. There's very, very few single-hulled tankers transiting the globe at the moment and carrying oil. That was done for a reason. That was done because the risk was identified. Look, this is the problem we're facing. This is what we need to do to remove that risk. Then the next, we're looking at preparedness and response. Good old OPRC 90. As an oil spill response professional, this is a convention that we trot out every opportunity we get. Because this establishes measures of dealing with marine pollution incidents nationally and in cooperation with other countries. And that bit is the key, in cooperation with other countries. Many, many oil spills, especially marine oil spills, don't just impact the country where they've occurred. Oil spills don't notice international boundaries. They're happy to go anywhere that the tide and the wind and the currents will take. The time to start talking to our neighbours is not when there's been an incident. It's in the planning, the preparation, in running drills, in running exercises, in building the relationships and understanding who we're going to be working alongside if there is a large-scale incident. And last but not least, liability and compensation. Oil spills are expensive. Responding to oil spills is incredibly expensive. And there are mechanisms and frameworks in place to make funds available to help regions pay for the response. Especially in this case when it comes to maritime casualties involving oil tankers. So there are funds available. We should never not respond to an incident because we can't afford to do so. We should always be aware, and again, this is on the preparedness side. We should always be aware of where we can go to get help. talking about where we can go to get help. The IMO has some regional activity centres, various locations around the world. And when we're talking about people gathering information about what could go wrong or best practices in areas where they're making big strides in preventing oil spills or setting up a response organisation across boundaries, these regional activity centres can really benefit us. I've been exposed to this quite a lot this year as we have Michael Hernandez, who is based in our Fort Lauderdale response base over in Florida, who is seconded to our regional activity centre here in the Caribbean. So he's able to travel to many different countries, talk to many different organisations and understand, well, these people in Suriname are doing this, these people in Guyana are doing this, these people in Barbados are doing this. We can gather a picture of what's working well in our particular region and how we can share that information with others. So these regional activity centres are a really good resource for us. And they're always willing to share their experiences, share their knowledge, talk through, this is what's working well, this is how we could implement it in another area. So help is out there. We're not on our own when it comes to assessing what the potential impacts could be from the incident. So preparing to respond. Again, all of these things, and we'll talk about this more in a later webinar, but it's a step-by-step process. So we use the tiered preparedness and response wheel for oil spill response. So this is 15 elements that we've identified that could go in to a major response operation. And based upon our risks, based upon the incidents that could occur, the impacts they could have, we know how much resources, or we can estimate at least, how much resources we need immediately available to hand, which is the tier 1, which is the darker blue in the centre. What resources are available to us within our region, within our country, from other operators, from the government, from other OSRO organisations that we could call upon to assist us. And then last but not least, the tier 3. This is the international effort to deal with that incident. But one thing I want to point out, as we look at that graphic, you can see there's bold lines between the different segments. But in practice, that's not what happens. You don't get, oh, we stop tier 1, we go into a tier 2 because we've reached this level. It actually blends in to each other. So, for example, Oil Spill Response, the organisation that I work for, we're an international tier 3 response organisation. You have a big incident, you call upon us and we will throw everything, even the kitchen sink at it, to help you manage and deal with that incident. But you have a smaller incident, you have the potential of an incident. If you're a member of Oil Spill Response, we will send you 5 people, free of charge, pay for everything, taxis to the airport, taxis from the airport, hotel, even food, which is important because some of our guys eat a lot. Send you those people to your location in those early stages, regardless of the size of the incident that's either happened or potential. And why do we do that? We do that to help you make the right decisions as early on in the incident as we possibly can. Because in our experience, those decisions that you make in the first 6 to 12 hours of a response have a huge effect on how long and how successful that response operation can be. So while this is a very, very useful tool, this tiered preparedness wheel, we also understand that there's flexibility, that there's blending between the different tiers. Over-respond early on, we can always scale back, but we want to make sure we make the right decisions as early in the response as possible. Now, I apologize about the next slide because it's just so much data. And to be honest, this is one of my failures. Like I said, I'm 52 years old, so I struggle with modern technology. But AI is something that we read about all the time. Oh, it's revolutionizing this, it's revolutionizing that. But I've seen it. I've seen how companies are using it here to identify potential oil spill scenarios and also come up with solutions on the best ways to deal with them. And at a very simple level, and I'll let you read through that slide if you're so inclined, but at the very basic level, if you think about all the data that we've gathered, even in my time, the past 17 years of oil spill response, all the data, the files that I have about different responses, about different capability reviews, about different risk assessments that I've done, it's formed a data lake almost, this huge amount of data. And we want to interrogate that data. We want to look for patterns. We want to see what we can learn from everything and distill it down into some usable action points. And that's what AI helps us do. It takes this massive amount of data, looks for these patterns, looks for things that are coming up all the time, and provides us with information that allow us to make the right decisions at the right time. So the AI doesn't replace people. It doesn't take the incident commander out of the response structure. It doesn't allow us to type in a question and it come up, hey, you need to do this, this, and this. It allows us to look at the data that's driven other responses and make better decisions based on this data. So that's historical data, but also what's happening right now. If you think about any response that goes on, we're getting SCAT reports, we're getting aerial surveillance reports, we're getting reports from the different response teams, from the on-scene commanders, from the key stakeholders, from the general public. All these reports, all this data is coming in. What AI allows us to do is to look for the patterns, to get the key elements out of this huge amount of data so we can address it, we can make the right decisions. So that, like I said, there's a number of tools out there, very simple tools that allow us to start this preparedness journey. If you've been experienced, if you've worked in the oil and gas industry, or you had to manage risks for any amount of time, you're probably comfortable with going through the process. But if you're new to this, it can be very overwhelming knowing where to start, what to look for. Like I said, there's a number of really good resources available out there that we can call upon. And at Oil Spill Response, one of the things that we have is this ready check. And this is a simple list of questions that allow us to see what have we got at the moment? What's available to us? Where do we feel comfortable that we are as prepared as we could be? Where do we think that we can improve? So simple questions and a simple assessment structure. The traffic light. Green for go, yes, we're all established. Red for stop, no, we're totally missing this. an amber for something in the middle. Yeah, we've addressed it, but we think we could probably do better. And once we've got that, then we can really hone in on those different sections and see, okay, we're comfortable with this. We know we really need to do something about that. Or we probably need to gather some more information and see where we can improve. Okay, so like I said, today was just a general overview, and I understand I've thrown so much information at you. You're probably sat there drinking your coffee, looking at the computer screen going, oh my goodness, this hasn't helped at all. But this is part of a series, part of a process. And our next webinar is going to be on the 10th of October, where we're going to go into more detail about this risk assessment and contingency planning. So looking at how we discover what we are doing that could cause an oil spill and how we could prepare to respond to that incident. There's also another range of webinars coming out from Oil Spill Response. I know we briefly touched on AI today, but in the next couple of weeks, Liam Harrington Missing is also going to be doing a webinar where we're concentrating on AI, where we're looking at that and learning more about what the physical tools are out there, whether it be from organizations or companies such as Palantir or the other operators that are out there, and seeing how we can use it and how we use it as Oil Spill Response. And that's one of the strengths. One of the things that I just want to touch on is you're not alone in this process. There are tools, there are people, there are things that, resources that you can call upon that will help and support you as you go through this process. Obviously, I'm going to promote Oil Spill Response because they're my company, they're my peeps. Sounds so wrong coming from a 52-year-old, very, very white person to say peeps, but there we go. And we're available to help and support. Our website is a really useful resource that you can look at, especially the technical library. So our field guides, our assessments, the work that we've been doing with other organizations, it's all detailed there. You can go back through the different webinars that we've delivered over the years and pick out the topic or the element of preparedness that interests you and learn more about it. And there's also us as individuals. So my name is Tristan Barston. I probably should have introduced myself right at the start, but my name is Tristan Barston. As you can tell by my strong Texas accent, I'm based in our technical office here in Houston. So I'm available to give support, preparedness advice, anything that you need. My email address is up there. I'm supported by a team here in Houston. So we have Adriana Hansa, who's one of our leading consultants. We have Brett Morey, who is basically the Yoda of our subsea services that we offer. And then we have our duty managers. And our duty managers are our global core people who have had experience in responding to many, many different incidents all around the globe. They don't know the particular scenario that you're facing. They will find out there's somebody within our organization who has experience of this. Now I know today I've thrown a lot of information at you, and these are the various sources that I've gone to for this information. This webinar will be available to you. Will be up on our website, and you'll be able to see all these different documents where I've gone for this information. one of the things that I will say, especially if you're just beginning in the oil spill preparedness activities, that slide 5, that human health and socioeconomic effects. This was taken from Deepwater Horizon. So obviously something that happened over a decade ago now, but there's so much study been put into that, and the knowledge that we gain from that is absolutely changing the way that we think about how oil spills can impact people. Okay, well, that finishes the presentation for today. I was hoping to give us a little bit longer for questions and answers. It seems like we've got 2 minutes. Isabel, I see your hand is up. So we have 2 minutes to answer questions.
I think one of the key questions actually is, will you be able to share the presentation slides? That's the question that's coming through. And Isabel's hand was a mistake. She apologises.
Oh, no problems at all. So this webinar is going to be available on our website pretty soon, isn't it?
Yeah,
Emma?
so we'll edit it and get it on the website probably tomorrow.
Okay,
and
no
then
problems.
We can send out the slides if you're happy to share the actual slides.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you can delete the segment where my laptop shut down and make me look more professional and like I know what I'm doing, then that would be great. There was a quick question about mystery spills, about where do mystery spills come from? So that is a great question. The mystery spills are really spills where the responsible party isn't known. That's the biggest definition that I can give you. All of a sudden, oil has appeared in a certain area and nobody is taking responsibility for where it's come from. Now, there will be an investigation. It's likely that the responsible party will be found, but that can take days, weeks, possibly even months. It's too long to wait to respond to this incident for mystery spills. So this is where governments or regional response agencies need to be set up to respond, to do something to those spills. No problems. Okay. Well, it's 9 a.m. here in sunny Houston. Thank you very much for your attention today. Again, I apologize for the slight technical issue we had during the first third of this presentation. I look forward to talking to you more, hopefully never during an actual incident and always on the preparedness side. But again, thank you very much, everybody.